Hello, welcome to the third episode of the HR Legislation Podcast. My name is Zokpayemi and I'm joined by two experts on human resources issues, Labib and Juliet.
Hi everyone, this is Labib here. Good to meet you everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Juliet.
Today we are discussing the Manitoba Employment Standards Code. Whether you're an employee wondering about your rights at work or you're an employer wanting to make sure you are following the rules, this episode is for you. The Employment Standards Code provides employees and employers with information regarding working conditions for employees. This legislation guarantees fair working conditions for employees, covering key areas like wages, hours of work, leaves, and employment termination. Today, we are focusing on the Manitoba jurisdiction, where this code applies to most workplaces, setting the minimum standards all employers must follow. However, certain professionals like doctors or lawyers and independent contractors are excluded from these provisions. So, we are covering three major aspects of the code today: minimum wage, hours of work and overtime, and termination of employment. We also will talk about the importance of these rules for employees and employers.
Alright, so let's dive into the key parts of the code. First up, we have working hours and overtime. Juliet, can you elaborate us on that?
Sure, Labib. So the main element is the minimum wage, which is defined as the lowest wage that an employer can legally pay to its staff. If they want, employers are free to pay higher wage or provide more benefits to their employees, but they can't pay less than the minimum rights established in the Labor Standards Code. In this way, a certain amount is established annually for the entire province, and on that basis, employers provide higher wage, motivating their staff. Currently, the minimum wage for the province of Manitoba is $15.80 per hour as October 1st, 2024. So in Manitoba, standard working hours are 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week. If you work beyond these hours, you are entitled to overtime pay, which is typically 1.5 times your regular wage. An employer needs to give you at least 30 minutes of unpaid break time after 5 hours of work. True, they don't have to pay for that break unless you are working through it.
Oh, that's good to know. And what about paydays? I know there are some rules about how often people need to be paid.
Yes, employees must be paid at least twice a month, including wages for regular hours, overtime, and vacation pay. Employers must also provide pay stubs showing a breakdown of wages, deduction, and hours worked. But there are also other important regulations that we should know, such as the weekly limit for overtime pay is 40 hours and the daily limit is 8 hours. It's important to know that even if these overtime hours are being paid, employees are entitled to a rest period of no less than 24 consecutive hours per week. It's also important to mention that some employees are exempt from overtime provisions.
Yes, another important aspect for both employees and employers is to have clarification on which holidays are established in the province of Manitoba, as well as to know how the remuneration for work on these days is handled, for which is established that is muy be payment of a regular work day. Here are the holidays established of the code: New Year Day, Lois Rate Day, Good Friday, Victoria Day, Canada Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day.
Another question we get is about termination. I know a lot of people are worried about getting fired without any notice.
That's a hot topic here. The code sets out some very specific rules when it comes to termination notices. Here's the deal. The rules for how much notice an employer must give you and when terminating a contract really depend on why you are being let go. If there is no valid reason for the dismissal, meaning you are being let go without just cause, the employee has a right to receive either a notice of termination or compensation for that notice. How long that notice period is? Well, it depends on how long you have been with the company. So, let's break it down by length of service. If you have been with the company for less than a year, you should get at least 1 week of notice. If you have worked for at least 1 year but less than 3 years, you are entitled to 2 weeks. If you have put in at least 5 but less than 10 years, you are looking at 6 weeks of notice. And if you have crossed that 10-year mark, your employer needs to give you 8 weeks. For example, if you have been with a company for say 2 years and they want to let you go without any just cause, they are legally required to give you at least 2 weeks notice. But if they don't give you notice, they have to provide severance pay. The longer you're with a company, the more notice they owe you. Now, don't forget, this works both ways. If you are planning to quit, you also need to give your employer notice. The rule here is pretty simple. If you have been with the company for over 30 days, you need to provide at least 1 week's notice.
Another common question is, can I get paid overtime if I am working as a part-time?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, even part-time employees are entitled to overtime pay if they work more than the standard hours. That is 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week.
Another important part of the code is misconduct. What happens when an employer breaks the code?
Yeah, the consequences. Well, there are 2 consequences we can say: direct consequences and indirect consequences. If an employer fails to comply with overtime rules or does not provide the required termination notice, they could face fines or legal actions. Employees can file complaints with Manitoba Employment Standards too, and the employer may be forced to pay back wages or additional compensation. On the other hand, beyond the legal costs, non-compliance can damage the company's reputation, lower employee morale, and lead to higher turnover. Ensuring compliance not only avoids penalties but also supports a healthier work environment.
Oh, we have covered a lot of ground today, from working hours and wages to leave protections and termination rights. I think the biggest takeaway is that the Manitoba Employment Standard Code is there to ensure fairness in the workplace, both for employees and employers.
Exactly. Whether you are unsure about overtime, your rights during maternity leave, or what happens if you let go or you want to quit, it's all in the code. And if you are ever in doubt, there are resources available. You can visit the official Manitoba Employment Standards website or talk to an HR professional or legal advisor for more details.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. We hope this episode helped clarify some things for you. If you have more questions or ideas for future topic, let us know.